Welcome back to the Dr. Rob Show. My first two guests are part of a widely recognized national not-for-profit mentoring program that is changing the lives of thousands of kids and young adults across the United States. Meet Marcus Sutra. He is the Chief Operating Officer from Eye to Eye, and he is joined by Matt Bloom, who is a Think Different diplomat with the program Welcome to You Both. So we were talking earlier, and it's really a fascinating story. Tell us about, first of all, Eye to Eye, how it started, and your relationship with that.
Sure. Well, thank you for having us on today. This is great. So my name is Marcus Sutra. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Eye to Eye, and I'm the person with dyslexia and ADHD myself. I was diagnosed in 3rd grade and went through school really kind of not understanding what those labels meant and how it was going to affect me in school and in my life. And being able, after years of working to accommodate my learning disability and figuring out what accommodations were going to be good for me and learning how to advocate for those accommodations, I went on to college and studied education and then got involved in Eye to Eye in its early stages and I helped build the organization for about the last 8 years.
Okay, so what is Eye to Eye? What's their actual mission? What do they do?
Sure. So we're a national mentor organization for people with learning disabilities by people with learning disabilities. We have 56 chapters around the country in 22 states. And what we do is we get college students, people like Matt here, who have learning disabilities, to work in local middle schools near their colleges with younger kids who have similar labels.
That's really fascinating because you told me you started at Brown University in 2005. Is that correct?
Yeah, in 2004 I started at Brown
2004?
University and was a program there by some students who basically wanted to create a community for themselves, for students
Which is really fascinating because you would think what kids with learning disabilities are at Brown, right? It's an Ivy League school. Obviously, you figure everybody there, but obviously they've developed these incredible compensatory mechanisms to be able to allow them to learn at that level.
Yeah, we're everywhere. We like to say we're in community colleges, state schools, Ivy League institutions. So students with learning disabilities end up in lots of different types of communities, and lots of different types of schools.
Great. So what you're doing is you're taking kids that are in college that have obviously learned ways to either compensate or overcome their disabilities, and they're in universities, and they're now going out to the community and working with other kids that have that type of disability.
Yeah, and they're sharing their story, and they're also utilizing our curriculum. We have an art-based curriculum that teaches a few different things. It works on self-esteem, self-advocacy, metacognition, so learning about how you think and how you learn best, and creating an LD community for the college students as well as the middle school students.
That's fantastic. Matt, your story before was really fascinating. So I know you're a diplomat. So explain what that means and explains what you've done and then your story.
Well, when we hear the word diplomat, I like to remind people that I'm one amongst a very large team of people, and we've been everywhere. We've spoken in Washington to senators and congressmen. We've been at schools. We've been at all different educational institutions and facilities. I myself have spoken at places like NYU in front of grad students majoring in teaching people with learning differences. I've spoken at Pace University. I've spoken at the SAT accommodations and evaluation staff while I was in the midst of taking the SAT. And what I do is when I go to these places, I tell them first off about Eye to Eye, who we are and what we do, and then I tell them about LDs, what they are, how they can affect us, and then I give them my firsthand portrayal of what having one is like.
Yeah, so quickly tell us about your story, because you said at a young age you were diagnosed with dyslexia. And then you went through schooling and you went to a special school that accommodated that. And so, tell us about that and how you eventually ended up to where at this point you're really majoring in English as well as psychology in a university.
Well, when I tell my story, I like to ask people if they remember the 1st grade, and most often they remember bits and pieces. I remember the 1st grade in its entirety because it was such a traumatic experience for me in a public school. And it was not until I got diagnosed by a doctor on my parents' behalf that I transitioned into a school called Windward that specializes in language-based disabilities, and I stayed there where I repeated the 1st grade, and I stayed there up until 8th grade until I was ready to transition out into a more mainstream school. And from there, things kind of really fell into place. I really started to, ironically, find a passion for what I loathed only so few years ago.
Right, so that you're now reading above grade level, is that correct?
Well,
or at grade level?
That's a complicated question, because while my reading comprehension is probably above grade level,
right, which is,
if you ask me to read this in a certain amount of time,
right,
it'd probably be much lower
right,
grade level. I read and I love to read, but it's a very long process. It's an active process. It doesn't come naturally as I think it does to most.
Yeah, but the thing is, at this point, you're a freshman now at SUNY Binghamton, which is an incredible school, and you've been able to somewhat overcome. What I want you to do is let people know more about how they can find out about your organization and get in touch with you.
Yeah, sure. So you can go to eye2eyenational.org, obviously, and find out. There's a few different ways to kind of plug into our work. The quickest way, if you have a young child in the tri-state area, would be to get involved in our summer camp that's going on in the first week of July, or July 7th, I should say. The second thing is we have a tour of students who are going to be traveling across the country, sharing their story, and they're going to be doing events all throughout the South and the Northeast, so you can get involved in one of those events there. We also have our co-founder has just written a book that's going to be coming out on August 26th, so that'd be a great guide for parents as well.
Great. Well, thank you, both of you. Up next, find out how service dogs are helping improve the quality of life of those living with autism. That and more when we return, and thank you to you guys. You were great.